All right, they're two excellent projects and certainly worth taking a look at to see how they've come together, not just from the built form point of view, but also in how they've integrated that co-location of care and independence. And we're now up to the final panel of the session, and I have shaved about 5 minutes off each one, so I do thank the speakers for being flexible with me. And the final session for the Retirement Living Breakaway, what we're going to talk about now is something a bit different. We've just been speaking about co-location, we've been speaking about, the change of services in retirement villages. We're talking about the change of care. And what we want to do now is talk about the people on the ground, the village staff, and really start looking at how, in addition to the physical asset, they are the biggest asset that we've got as operators of retirement villages. And in saying that, I was going to invite Deanna McMaster, who's a partner of Minter Ellison, to join me. And coming up is James Teodoro, who's the Executive Recruitment Manager for DCM Executive Recruitment. So I'll ask James and Deanna to come up. And I think we had all one of the great things is we had all these notes prepared for conversations as Deanna comes to stage, please. And James is somewhere coming up. We had all these conversation points set for this afternoon, which was really quite fascinating. But something really stood out to me in the presentation from yourself, Deanna, just before lunch, and that was this area of, a responsible person. And as you started talking about the changes to the bill and what that actually means, are we getting to a point where within these communities where we're providing care or where we're providing support or we're saying we're doing it as an approved provider, do village managers, the people on the ground, are they actually falling under this responsible person?
Yeah, I think it's something we're going to have to keep an eye on. There's a few technical hurdles to think about, but when you start at the beginning and think a responsible person is anyone responsible for day-to-day operations of the registered provider, you're cutting it a bit fine for some village managers. But the other thresholds will be the Aged Care Act isn't going to apply, so you're not going to have these personal due diligence duties unless the accommodation meets those thresholds that we spoke about. So has it been fitted, furnished and staffed to provide aged care services? I think sometimes we will have that particular category ticked. But secondly, then you still have to be delivering a funded aged care service. So services that are delivered privately and not covered by the Act would still not fall. And then of course you've got to be a registered provider. So I think there's a few thresholds to tick, but certainly there's a technical risk, I think, that village managers might be captured by these, which is an unintended consequence, I think, of this regime.
I think it might be an unintended consequence, but when you certainly look at the way the role of the village managers evolved, certainly over my 2 decades in the sector, there's certainly more and more being put upon them. And before we came on stage, I was liking this too, that, the very first introduction of the Aged Care Act in 1996, it had the unintended consequence of forcing a whole lot of registered nurses out of the sector as they looked to move away from the red tape and some of the obligations that were being put on them. And if the sector doesn't sort of get across this and get some very clear clarity, are we looking at a point where it could be triggering turnover of managers going, we do provide care, we do fall into this category, I don't want this responsibility, it's time for me to leave?
Yeah, I mean, lawyers wear black hats, so I'm sorry for this view, but I am a little bit worried about the roles. So I don't think it's just the new aged care or the proposed Aged Care Act. I think it's also the way the safety regulators are working as well. In sort of our practice at Minters, the regulator is more interested in RV than aged care because I think they see that aged care has other regulatory structures, whereas there's been a number of VMs we've had to work with that have had to be at the mercy of really difficult investigations from regulators when, you know, something quite beyond their control has happened to one of the residents. So I think you're right, that the role is becoming so much more complicated, and I am worried it's going to... People who are informed enough perhaps decide to look for work outside the sector, which is not a good outcome at all.
And we weren't making this a doom and gloom session, by the way. It was more about saying how the landscape has changed. And James, the reason we've got you up here talking today is that you start to hear about some of these things that the requirement, it's a little bit more than what you see on a paper job description. So you're currently in the market talking to bring talent into the sector. How do you address some of these conversations with people considering the roles and what it means to be a village manager?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because sometimes you'll have a conversation with someone outside the sector and they'll read a job description and they'll think, geez, that's really quite a wide job. And then you actually talk them through the specifics of a village manager job and it's even wider. So I think really what you do when you look for a village, someone new to the sector at least anyway, is someone that I guess can probably critically think and sort of talk on their feet, you know, do things, deal with things as they come along, can work proactively, I guess, and can develop and learn situationally. But it's not an easy thing to be a village manager, and that's probably the big point of this discussion, is that there are so many challenges associated with the role, and often these people are in isolated locations. They're not sitting in an office with support networks around them, so a lot of the decisions they make or the conversations they have are done on their own. So it's always daunting, I guess, but good people and good village managers, potential village managers, will learn to kind of, I guess, adapt their thinking to deal with anything that comes up.
Yeah, great. And I think that was interesting. You know, sometimes you look at the role of a village manager, certainly where you sort of get outside, you know, the metropolitan area. You can almost liken it to sometimes being a lone worker, where you have an individual responsible for an asset worth tens of millions of dollars, you know, with residents and minimal staffing, and then all of a sudden we start overlaying that role of just looking after the asset, managing the resident experience. Then you start saying, hey, there's these work health safety regulations, there's potential, you know, duty of care, which we haven't really spoken about. So when you're talking to clients about starting up or establishing a village, what are some of the things, Deanna, you're talking to, hey, make sure you've got someone on the ground who can tick these boxes? What are some of the keys that you're calling out to your clients?
I think you want a VM who really leans into these weird and wonderful regulatory regimes and legal obligations, rather than someone that, you know, there is a particular village manager that stands out in my mind that every time some near miss happens, they sort of say to me, oh, I'm going to jail now, aren't I? And it's like, no, you're not. And we sort of want someone that is happy to front an inspector and say, this is all the wonderful things we do at this village. It is really safe, and this is what I'm focused on, and this is the world that we live in, and we, you know, people are here to live independently. We're not watching them every minute of every day. And so I think the VMs that are prepared to lean in, but then also prepared to really embrace the way we're seeing workplaces go and the way they manage staff as well, whether it's catering staff or cleaning staff or, you know, any of the above. It's not be frightened of these new ways of respect at work and, you know, positive working environments. It's just someone who's open-minded and happy to get involved, I think.
And James, you're talking about going out and bringing someone into these environments where you've got catering operations, asset bases, different levels of care. Where are you trying to find talent to bring into the sector rather than just moving the deck chairs around?
Yeah, so there's a few areas. Obviously, there, you know, people that I've dealt directly with are people that have worked in tourism and hospitality, that have managed either sort of hotels or large venues. People who have managed, say, university accommodation or things like that and similar, people who have managed facilities, and I guess people that have just sort of come from operational or management type roles, say someone like a medical centre practice manager or something like that, you know, because often what you have to do is they may not be able to address specific criteria in the role and in their worked experience, but a medical practice manager would have had difficult conversations with people in challenging situations 1,000 times over, so you know that they could transfer those sorts of skills into a retirement village role, or someone that's managed a facility before would know about preventative maintenance and how to manage a team of contractors and do these things. And what you have to then identify is that they have, I guess, the other requisite skills that whatever that village might be and whatever that setting is, needs to obviously operate well to support its residents and the organisation.
And when you run through all that, obviously, trying to find the right talent to bring in, when you've got that layer of complication and technical requirement, it's a bit more than just whacking an add-on seek, isn't it? You really got to, can you talk a bit about some of the processes that you're starting to, use at your disposal to really, find the best talent so that we're getting the right people into these communities that, that are able to tick the boxes that Deanna's talking about, but more importantly, create really good experiences for the residents?
Yeah, definitely. So I think probably the first thing you have to do is talk to your client, talk about what they want in an employee, then obviously learn about the village, any specific things, problems or facilities or I don't know, incentives or whatever they might run are, and then work out from there probably the type of person you need. And then, what I do is try to keep, in most metropolitan locations, an active pool of people, some obviously who have been village managers before, but other ones who might have that sort of level of skill, and then get them to talk about their experience and how they've done something that sort of lines up quite similarly with whatever those descriptors are, whatever those key responsibilities are in the role, to express that, this is slightly different format, but they've done whatever this thing might be before. And once you do that, you can, I guess, tailor the type of, or the person you put before a client to really suit whatever's going on or whatever that village needs in a specific sense. And I think it's beyond what, say, a standard recruitment agency does, which is just get a bunch of CVs, flick them over, hope that one lands. You learn about the client, you learn about the candidate, you learn about the village, and what that then does is kind of stops wasting everyone's time, potentially shortens the process, and obviously makes, I guess, coming in, if it's someone new to the industry, coming into that industry, a much more enjoyable experience coming in, and gives them a better chance at really thriving as a village manager in whatever organisation that might be. Yeah,
so it sounds like the whole skills matching part is a big part.
It's like dating, but probably easier.
Speaking from experience?
Yeah, they work me out pretty quickly, but no, it's like that. You've got to really fine tune, and obviously dating websites and things have always tried to do that with people, but this is actually doing it in a practical sense, because it is a relationship and you're going to spend, a third of your life there basically. So it is like that.
Maybe we got it wrong. We need a dating algorithm to help with finding talent. And Deanna, you spoke a bit about you're seeing more and more regulators and investigatory bodies starting to come on site and talking to village managers. Is this a trend we actually need to have on our radar as a sector, in the sense of saying we need to be aware this is going on and be preparing our teams on the ground, similar to, some of us have done media training and all those sorts of things over the year, almost gearing them up in case this happens?
Yeah, I think absolutely it's something we should be investing in. I have to say I have been really shocked at the interest in retirement villages by safety regulators across the country, and often it's a really sad accident occurs and the family of that particular resident is very aggrieved and reaches out and makes a phone call, and then an inspector visits, and there is, of course I sound like a lawyer again, but there's only one chance to get that right. And having your village manager ready to greet that person, have them sign in as a visitor, escort them round, and have the right messages given, that can make all the difference in how that plays out. And I've seen it lots of times. If you do it well and you're prepared, chances are that that's all it is, just a visit. Whereas if you're not, I've got a matter at the moment where we're on our third notice to produce information. The village is being asked why it basically wasn't run like a hospital, frankly, and all the questions are really unfair, but the regulators just don't understand the concept of independent living.
That's obviously then a real challenge in the sense that you've got all these sort of things working against us, getting the right people on the ground with the right transferable skills to set us up for success. But at the same time, it's this age-old problem this sector's been talking about forever and a day. The regulator doesn't understand what independent living is, which I think, James, coming to what you were talking about before, is all the more reason to be digging a little deeper to find, the person who's got that skill set to bring in. And even though you might have to train them around the mechanics of what a village is, it's that temperament and professionalism and transferableness to make sure you're not exposed should someone come knocking on the door.
I think Deanna can talk to this better than I can, but obviously, by having someone, a good village manager, you de-risk that part of your organisation so much, and you reduce the potential liability for a whole plethora of things that might happen that a good village manager will identify, proactively solve, or reach out to management or whatever it might be. And I think, as you say, these people can be quite isolated, particularly in regional settings. Having someone that can do that just sort of supports your business and gives you confidence in the fact that you can look at other things because this person is taking care of this for you. So it probably also goes to, and I think this is certainly the case that you see in the market now, that village managers maybe were sort of order takers 20 years ago, and they'd sit behind the desk and someone would say, my cold water tap's not working on the faucet or something like that, and you get it fixed. But, the responsibilities and the role have grown and shifted so dramatically that, probably now the remuneration that some village managers get, starting to reflect this. And there's obviously a discussion to be had, and I think this has been had many times before, that village managers aren't probably paid enough for the scope of work that they're responsible with.
No, I think I'd agree with that.
So, it's a really important thing, and having that right person there has so many, I guess, benefits you can see, but benefits you won't necessarily see, but they'll take care of, I think.
And it's not just the compliance stuff, it's also being proactive around how the village presents, which then has a flow-on effect to the overall experience of the residents, and that has a flow-on effect to the, the retails that you're getting when we're selling the units and reselling the units in our refurb processes. So, Dan, looking around the room, there's a whole lot of retirement village operators I can see. What are some of the things you think they should have on their radar in the next, say, 18 to 24 months that they need to be talking back and just preparing their village managers for?
Yeah, I think the new world we're in is very much here with the safety regulators. They are going to be visiting retirement villages more than they were, and we've got proof in the pudding, unfortunately, back at work at the moment. But preparing them for that engagement, making sure they'll understand that the really simple steps to follow is one. The other thing that we do see a little bit more of is the coroner becoming involved from time to time, and it's all the same rules. So I think it's just getting the village manager to be ready for that. I think the other thing is just getting them better placed to deal with privacy issues as well, because we're seeing some reform in that space. And while there might be some exemptions in relation to employees, there aren't in relation to residents. So we've got to be super careful about any transfer of information. And regulators often ask you to share things because you're a good bloke or a good gal, and then that's not an exemption to privacy laws. So we've got to prepare them just for this increase in regulatory space. And then I also wonder if it's calming them a bit about what we're going to hear a lot about with the New Age Care Act, and being really definitive about saying to them, in this particular environment, you are not a responsible person. You're not exposed to penalties up to and including imprisonment. And so calm down and let us work with you. Or if they are in that environment, to be honest, preparing them appropriately. They need access to more information and more reporting than they get right now.
I think that's an interesting point. It's being able to say what it is and what it isn't, to be able to either calm down the situation and put out the fire, or be able to triage it in a way to upskill them to be in front of the changes that are potentially coming down the line for those roles. Because based on what you read out before, that requirement is only going to be a small proportion of the overall, say there's 2,000 village managers in the country, that might only apply to 10 to 15% of them when you look at what the models are within those villages. But that could still be, a few hundred people and professionals that, need to be upskilled and have some role clarity put in. and then they need to decide if that's a risk that they want in their career.
And you know, the penalties are serious, and if it goes the way that other laws with similar penalties go, you won't be able to get insurance because it's, you know, against public policy to be insured for criminal penalties and things like that. So it's an odd analogy to draw, I'm sure, to everyone in the room, but we did this in mining a couple of decades ago, where we introduced personal criminal penalties for the person who runs the mine. And what that really created was a mass exodus from people in those roles in mining, but also massive increases in salaries to attract the right people to those positions. And so, you know, I think that's something I think it is important for every village operator to be able to articulate whether you are or aren't in this space of this additional liability, so that you are engaging the right people and giving them the right info.
And there's probably, and I'm being a bit opportunistic because I know there's a few in the audience, but it's also a real opportunity to be engaging with, you know, the residents in the various states as well, you know, because I think this could be something that, you know, we could talk to collectively as a sector, not just from the operator legal perspective, but also from the concern that the residents might have on some of these developments as well. And I'm just watching the clock, and we're running short on time. I just want to give you a chance, James, from some of the things that you're hearing here today and the other sectors that you've worked on, you know, government, health, education, quite a wide range. You know, what can you see coming down the line for this sector as some of these more compliance and regulatory requirements really start to fall on the shoulders of these key people?
Well, probably the most basic thing is that then recruiting the right people for all of these roles, from even below the village manager to, you know, assistant village managers, all the way up, becomes all the more important, and getting the right people in the right roles with those right skill sets or, you know, experience or whatever it might be described as, is just infinitely more important. So, you know, that process, I mean, we heard a story about a village that in 20 years had 14 different village managers, and I just can't imagine that is a good thing for the organisation. It's not a good thing for the residents. That's only a very small thing, but, you know, continuity of people there, you know, gives, I guess, sort of strength to everyone else around them to be able to deliver what they're doing. So that recruitment piece and having the right people in your organisation in those specific roles is just so much more important, particularly, I mean, village managers, but also in the aged care setting where there's a talent shortage. So you're competing against other industries for these people, and the only way you get them is to have, I guess, an organisation that supports them, you know, maybe remuneration that matches their skill set, and obviously, if they want it, I guess a kind of career pathway forward that might also support them.
And I think the more the compliance comes, I think the more those career pathways tend to open themselves up when you look at some of the other sectors that have been through this over the last decade or so. All right. I'm very conscious of time. I know we've got afternoon tea waiting for us outside. So please, I'll ask you all to thank James and Deanna for their time up here this afternoon, their insights and their thoughts. I think we've had 90 minutes with competing panels going on around the room, but I think what's really interesting is when you start to look at how the conversation in this sector kind of goes around in circles. I remember 20 years ago everyone was talking about how service departments are a great thing, and they fell off the nose, and now we're talking about independent living becoming these pseudo-care environments. I think that's certainly fascinating and one to watch. And then I think the other one is really the people that we have on the ground and how we educate and support them, knowing that the more these compliance matters come through and regulatory matters come through, we really need to be setting them up for success and not creating these fear environments where they're calling someone like a lawyer and go, right, I've had an issue, am I going to jail? I don't think that's a good way to represent what we're trying to do as a sector. So please, I won't hold you up any longer. Please go out and enjoy some afternoon tea. And I think we're back in here shortly according to the program in about half an hour or 40 minutes. So listen for the bell, but please enjoy the break and we'll talk to you all soon. Thank you.